there. I've often noticed when teaching planning, particularly urban design, that you can often find yourself making statements that seem pretty obvious to statement now, they seem pretty clear obvious. Yet there are matters which are hardly ever implemented in practice. If you did implement them, they'd be pretty revolutionary. That's going to be my theme of what I have to say. The first statements I'd like to start with. The first statement. Physical form lasts a very long time. Even here in Turkey, we've got to take time at Istanbul. You've got buildings there, been there for 2,000 years, if not more. In other parts of the world, even longer than that. But even if you put up a house now, it may be there for 60 years, maybe for hundreds, thousands. You find that the roads may be widened, but the line of the road stays the same. We know that components of the urban form can change at different rates. We've got a lot of change in retailing and industrial premises and things like that. Yes, we know they change at different rates, but they last a long time. Here's a picture where in Brisbane, where I've just been living for about 11 years. I've now returned to live in England. Showing this because this shows something more recent. This is largely mid-20th century housing. But these houses are probably going to be there for quite some time. Certainly the road patterns, they're not going to be all pulled down in a few years and completely rebuilt to completely different. But we do notice that a motorway has been put in some green space that remains, and that's at some point I will be returning to in my talk. But you have to think about it. A lot of that urban area, this residential area, is all going to be like that for a very long time indeed, even though patterns of housing may change, education may change, healthcare, employment, shopping, all these things will change, but a lot of that structure will be there for a long time. Also, now, next point to note, it's much easier for any built form to stop things happening than it to make them. Yes, you can't make people use public transport, but you can actually lay out the city so it's very difficult. If you pedestrianise a road, you can't drive down it. You could stop things happening. Even though we may not encourage people to do things, or we like them to do things, yes, we can't do them. But what urban form can really do is stop things happening. Therefore, the long-term nature is a very important thing. It will stop things happening. Next point is I would like to suggest that urban growth and the growth of cities is inevitable. That sounds a bit strong. At least putting it more vigorously, yes, I would suggest it's unwise to assume that they are not going to grow. Yes, you have mining towns and things that goes down, but if you look at nearly all cities around the world, all urban areas, they are subject to continuous expansion. Or if you are planning them, could you plan on the basis that they will never grow? They will never grow in outward extent. They will never increase in density. Nevertheless, I wish to suggest that in all my own observations, cities are very rarely planned to be extended. When you put the next part in, it is not planned on the basis you're going to add something to it, and then add something to it again. You don't say the city is not planned to be extendable. People don't seem to think about the long term. I often get what I often don't prefer myself as having onion rings around cities. You put a residential extension to the city, built out from major roads. It's not designed for another bit on to it. So you get the next bit is difficult. Where you are new radial roads built, you just have to putting in new bus services, this kind of thing can be difficult. This is Chelmsford, where I was living before I went to Australia. I was living in Chelmsford for 25, 30 years, teaching at Stroud University there. As said, I was also a local councillor there. So I'm talking, this is the city I know. I'm not going to say it's particularly good or bad compared to others, but I give this example because I'm very familiar with it. If you look at I don't have time to work on that. Area A was built in the 1970s. A bit before that, things not shown before that, in the 1960s. Then there was, this thing was 1930s rework. 1930s bypass. This is about here 1980s bypass. They've got bypass, then you expand to another bypass. But Area B was built in the late 1980s, and it was built with that dotted line surrounding it with a nice hard edge, a very nice road that gave a very hard edge, beautifully designed to give an edge to the city. But this almost seemed to be on the assumption that that would be the new edge, so it wouldn't expand. But what happened, of course, there was still growth came along, and in the 1990s, Area C was built. It's now building stuff beyond C. C, in some ways, goes up to the 1980s bypass. But all the time, people apparently think that the extension they're building at the moment is going to be the last one. It isn't planned. I wish to suggest this is pretty typical. Also, I would also suggest, in all my observations, not only are cities not planned so they can be extended outwards, they are not planned so that you could retrofit the infrastructure. As cities expand, both are. Possible. Oh, thank you. It's very kind. Although they're not planned without extension, they're not planned for increase in density, so you could do that easily. They're not planned so you retrofit the infrastructure. As the city gets bigger, either in density or outward expansion, this will put great strain on existing infrastructure. There were in certain United States and America, that places, you get cities that collapse in the centre. Assuming you're preventing that, then you will get increasing demands on the existing roads and railways, and the central shopping area, and schools, hospitals. All the existing things will be made, and we have existing demands put upon them by the outward extension. Just an example of Taipei, as you get typical lots of Southeast Asian cities there, you again to see how they have to put in motorway afterwards. You get the same in Bangkok and some other places I would recommend. Again, I mentioned how John Lang this morning mentioned Pudong, Shanghai, retrofitting to allow pedestrians, and so on. The examples all about it. Pudong is comparatively new. You have to then go back and make changes. But so all the time you build these cities so that they cannot have the infrastructure retrofitted, expanded. You cannot have it, the facilities expanded very easily because that was never allowed for when they were built. Effectively, the city was not planned. And I said they're not planned for extension, nor are they planned for increase in density. When you build a residential area, people do not appear to think about how in years to come will we increase the density easily. Yes, it may happen, but it will happen in a very costly and difficult manner. Can we then, you may ask, well, that's read all those white man statements, but can we then design a city that could be constructed? How can you do it? Well, people will say, oh, well, you talk about that. How on earth do you do it? Is it unrealistic? I would suggest it is possible. I would suggest that you could start on a rational basis with goals of sustainability and quality of life. From those, you can deduce how a city should be laid out so that you have got an actual physical structure within which other urban activities can change and develop over time. I would like just to take one of these sustainability principles, the reduction in the need to travel. This will lead to a sequential accessibility principle. Again, I'm not suggesting any of this is amazingly new. It's not first to say this, but what I am saying that these things are not actually taken literally, and they are not implemented. You would start by putting all your land uses adjacent to each other in 2 or 3 dimensions. This reduces the need for travel. Clearly, you can't do that with all of them. So, failing that, you want to put them within walking distance. Again, you can't do that with all of them. So, failing that, you put them within accessibility by some high-quality public transport link. So you walk to public transport station to get the train or tram to wherever you want to go. This gives you a definite sequence of safety. Amazingly new, but I wish to suggest this principle exists and it could be used, it could be implemented. Now this gives you, I often call the club awkward name headshed. In my writings I have not managed to find a more useful term for something where all development is within walking distance of the station. It gives you a diagram here like that, so you've got the railway station on the public transport link, and then you have density is high in the station and down, and is limited by the walking distance. Here, as I would suggest, about 800 metres, but again, the actual figure is not the important thing. What matters is the walking and the quality of public transport. You can assemble these on a kind of beads on string. Again, that would be amazingly original, and this idea has been around for a very long time, but I suggest it is not ever implemented. But if you do, you get a kind of green wedge behind between transit routes with the little bed sheds on them. You could go into great detail about and explore some how you would space these stations and bed sheds, these different arguments. I have on the table this leaflets about my book on the subject and other publications for robust city take arguments. But you can, which I explore different combinations. I tend to end up with the one you see at the bottom where you take about 800 metres with 200 metre gaps between. But again, the actual figures are not the point. The point is kind of that play out. What I do say is more original is that you can have these bed sheds that are non-residential as well as residential. It is sometimes noted that if you put a little railway station with housing around it, then what about park and ride? People are going to park, so this is going to make it very difficult to put shops opposite the railway station. I suggest that the solution is that you have residential bed sheds with shops at the centre of the station, and then you have non-residential ones, say for park and ride. If you're planning a new hospital complex, residential, industrial complex, new university campus, perhaps like the one we're meeting at the moment. Ideally, that could be placed around the railway station on the public transport line. There's no reason why you can have not all these bed sheds for all these other uses. You could develop then the theoretical models, what I do in my publications, is available there. You could play around with this then. You could say, well, let's play around with these ideas. Let's arrange, supposing the whole city was done into beats on string. And supposing you adjusted the walking distance, you adjusted the spacing, you play around with it. And I don't touch ideas to talk about all the different alternatives that you could explore for some time. If I do, in my publications, I do give my own explorations, but just for keeping things short here, I'm going to work on the basis of the 800 metre radius bed with 200 metre gaps. If you put it together, you get these kinds of patterns. Now, if you do this, you find that the patterns you get have some very interesting properties and some very advantageous ones. You begin to see here that you start to get green railways. And most importantly, you get what I term green enclaves, that you get, if you say you're not going to develop outside the fence, no development will occur more than 200 metres from the railway station. That's the important thing. You actually say it's implemented. You have real planning. Then you get these green spaces within the city, rather than your green spaces being around the edge of a green belt, which is difficult if the city is going to expand. Then green spaces occur within the city. Then you could say if you've got this structure, over time you could allow residential density to vary. You could allow the size of shopping centres around the stations to vary over time. They could change over time. Equally, say hospitals, schools, health things, all could change over time within the structure as it not only develops outwards, but as it goes outward, the ones that the original ones, when they go up in density. These will change over time. Density, I think, should be seen as something that changes over time, not something that works really planned for in which you fall. Then the green enclaves allow you to put in express rail links. You could retrofit those in time because you've got space to do it. Also, the green enclaves are allowing everybody to walk to green areas around the big city. So you walk to the station, you can walk to green areas where you want countryside, playing fields, urban agriculture, this sort of thing. All take place in the green enclaves, and they can be used to retrofit express rail links as the city expands. You can also put your roads in. If one makes a distinction, an important distinction, in my view, on roads Again, this is not new. I'm not saying any of this in itself is new. Other people here have made similar statements, but we distinguish between frontage and non-frontage roads. But what I'm saying is that you actually stick to it and implement it. And you say, right, within the pedestrians you have restricted speed, compulsory frontage of all uses to roads. You do not need this in the green enclaves, so you can have a whole network of roads. Now, it doesn't mean these roads are all motorways. Some of them might be. Some of them might be just one lane each direction, but they might expand over time. You could do this, but you can retrofit over time. But what is the amazing result here is that you suddenly find that even though the city has been laid out on an absolute principle of walking and public transport, you can drive everywhere. Incredible. Why? Because you get the green spaces. And this is different to what normally happens in cities around the world where developers want to fill green spaces in. You can expand it. That's a 20 kilometre radius. Here we have 20 kilometres with little retrofitted rail links and all of it. You expand. You tend to develop green railways. You get green roads and things like that. All develops over time in the spaces. And then you get to the details of what's actually going on. But it is the green spaces that give you your urban agriculture, your recreation. They enable also the retrofitting. There's plenty of space. If you measure the size of them, there's plenty of room for all these things within them. That is sticking to these planning principles that matters. It's the same thing we show with the roads. Again, of course, this is a theoretical model. I'm not saying you go out. I will come later to the actual implementation. But this is, as I say, examining this as a theoretical model before does reveal remarkable properties and remarkable pointers of potential planning principles. Now, what about systems of cities? Again, you sought to employ the same principles for the cities themselves. Let us take high-speed railway links and motorways, and you put your cities strung out along these major routes as you would in pedestrians themselves, inside the cities. Now, there'll be a problem over time. They may expand and they start to interact. You'll notice if you play around with these theoretical models, problems occur when you interact. Some of the other principles you are developing tend to break down as they interact. What is the solution to this? Why? Well, why not apply exactly the same principles inside the city as to the space between the cities? So again, you actually have systems of major routes, high-speed rail and motorways, and you string the cities along with gaps between. The point again becomes the gaps between. You almost have the kind of principles to apply to the whole megalopolis, as you might get like on, that's a base in China. China has now got these things developing at this moment with great combinations of cities. But here you have a principle, not just to plan the city itself, but to the whole combinations of major cities. All the same principles tend to apply. Now, just to summarise where we got to the moment, we've got the principle is walking plus public transport access. We notice that such a city is also motor vehicle accessible. It is also extendable in a sustainable manner. It is planned so you can keep on extending it. It is not constrained by green belts or theoretically it can go on. And then up until, on the basis that you're also having systems of cities, as I have described. It does allow for the retrofitting of infrastructure as the city expands. It does allow green access for all residents. Everyone will still walk to green areas and the countryside or for urban agricultural recreational areas. It depends, however, this only happens if certain things apply. One, you have the green enclaves, that you have planning policies that prevent rebuilding on certain areas within the city. This is fundamental. Also, you put quality public transport in to start with. The development is dependent on it. You only allow development where public transport is provided. These are things that often do not happen in reality. If you insist on those two things, if you say that's what planning means, then everything else tends to follow. Now, those are the basic principles and theoretical models. What may you say about possible practical implementation in this sort of world? what you notice is that we're talking about a set of principles, not a master plan. Certain kind of things that I fact, when I was Prof council, I was involved in Good Lead development of a local plan that had all these things in it. It didn't survive, that's the matter. But it is often debated in the system about can you, often people come up with this principle that the planning system should have definite long-term principles that last a very long time. They last all the time, hundreds of years necessarily, and these are what determine it. You don't need to physically design the city to last 100 years, but you can have planning principles. And so you don't need to frighten local people by saying, well, in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, this is where the development's going to go. To say, if it does go, in 50 years' time, we're still having these same principles on the basis of which we locate development. Now, you can apply these things to urban extensions, and I've been involved in this in practical politics. And you get here, say, extension. What happens is you take the railway line, you have a new station on it, and you have 800 metres limit to development, and then you leave a strategic gap between that and the existing city. So you're allowing these green spaces. The strategic gap is important, because you're allowing 800 metres of the games to take example as involved in practice. Then again, you look at existing settlements. In terms of existing settlements are shown by the hatching shaped lines, and you could say, right, you've got an this is existing towns and things there. You've got existing railway lines. Now you've got the station here, existing thing around it. Right, you place to put new housing is on the other side, so you make it picture. You can also have, or then in this example, we can put a new busway in and put new petrol around it. And this gives you some principles. What I say can be useful politically is actually to start to say, right, you know, these are the principles. You plan the principles, not arbitrarily deciding where to go on what shouts and hours. Now, some of these I would suggest, these green enclaves are not that unusual. It's not something that a lot of cities you find, because of various local circumstances, the land or rivers, you do get certainly green wedges on rivers. This is Melbourne in Australia. And just to say that this is along the Yarra River. But I'm not suggesting this is all ideal planning, but you do get within the existing urban area a huge green area. It's been used, interestingly, to electrify the motorway. Where do you put the motorway? You go in the green area. And if you examine it carefully, you've got here, this is the green edge, you've got a tram line here, and you've got a suburban railway line, and so you've got electrified motorway, green areas, and in fact, green development is all within walking distance actually of the transit. And now, this is not an ideal planning, most of the green areas, golf courses and things. I don't want to suggest that it hasn't been properly planned that way, but it has ended up with something. Again, Chelmsford, where I used to live, had the same thing. It's got big green wedges in the whole part of the planning system. And I would suggest that some of these ideas are not necessarily as that far from what happens in practice as might be thought. So you can actually get, and in reality, you would apply other principles in terms of the landform, particularly valleys, hills, rivers, to guide where you put these developments. Now, I would suggest that these principles can be applied not only just to urban extension, but to urban intensification, the increase of density, particularly residential density, to try to put it on some kind of rational basis. You could apply a potential idea. You could say, right next to the railway stations, they do allow high density. Again, this is nothing I would suggest you, in just saying that. What I would say is the extent to which these things are actually being implemented or taken literally. My point. That you then have within 400 metres you can have a higher density level, not as high down the station level. And then up to 800 metres, a little bit less density. Beyond 800 metres, you do not permit increase in density. So it gives you a natural basis to go on. And you're going to appear to be arguing fairly rationally here. And it gives you a planning principles. And again, when you start saying them like that, it doesn't sound all that amazing. Yet to try to implement these in practice, I would say something would be quite radical. It gives you something you can actually use this in practice. I'm tempted to do so. Now, going down to an even more detailed level, we talked about how residential areas, how do you plan so that they can be increasing density? What do I mean by this? Again, I suggest the secret is allowing for the green areas. So it's what you don't build on rather than you don't. Here, I just take just as a worked example, a 100 metre grid, just an example. It's just again another theoretical model. You take up top left corner, you've got, say, developed 12 dwellings per hectare. Now, what often does happen in practice is that you get pressure for, as density increases, to backland development. What's certainly been happening in Australia and New Zealand is that everybody puts one house in their back garden. Even back in England, we've still got lots of pressures. That local plan I led, we tried to introduce a policy to stop backland development where it would prejudice the comprehensive development of the area. And I think this sort of policy is desirable because if you prevent people developing their backland, interestingly, preventing that increase would enable density to be increased in the planned land. Because if you then look at some of the other people there, particularly if you don't look at all in the middle, you could just develop even up to 100 dwellings per hectare. You use the green space in the middle, not just for green, communal green areas. In fact, private gardens become communal green areas. They could be used for car parking. And this enables you to increase the density in a planned manner, which is difficult. If you get backland or sporadic development, all in different ways, it makes the whole plan doing it much more difficult. So the key thing is leaving areas undeveloped. This enables other areas to be developed. One could take other kinds of examples. This is just a kind of little worked example. What I'm trying to explain here is how you can actually plan for increased density. No density can be done on a rational basis. Now, what we notice is that land use and residential densities change a lot. That's what changes over time. But the physical form does not. This is often, I would say, contradictory. Therefore, to achieve long-term goals, the physical form must be robust. I'm taking robust from, again, the design principles of robust design, because we know we talked about the robust design of buildings that are robust when they could be used, their use can change over time. They can be naturally ventilated, and you can change, offices, shops, flats can be changed over time, the same building, without having to knock it down all the time. And we know that gives you certain kinds of principles of shadow plan design for buildings. The same, I'm suggesting, can be applied on much greater scales to city form. You want a robust city form within which urban activities can change over time. Robust city would then have these properties. Green spaces retained within it. Public transport designed in from the outset. Development limited to walking distance, not beyond. That comes survive, analysis survive the wrong. What then does this then, what messages does all this then have for urban design in particular? How could you plan? You don't know what's going to happen. I said that's why you plan. Planning is something you do because you don't know what's going to happen. If you knew what's going to happen, you wouldn't need to plan. But so what you do is that you say, because there were some things we could change we don't know about, we want some physical structure that will be robust and to cope with it. And this, I would suggest, in my view, is what planning really ought to be all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tony Hall, for your precious speech. Now, as we are ending the first day of our symposium, we would like to welcome you all in our opening dinner outside.
Education, health, transport, all these things. And then sometimes allow developers to come along and the developer will decide the physical form, the architect there, and we'll do this. The planner will say, right, in this location we're going to have certain quantities of things, and developers that can come along with schemes. We might give approval to those schemes. These seem almost like a kind of outer casing, a physical casing, in which we put the desired quantity of activities. I'm suggesting that is not the way to do it. The way to do it is to actually plan